Picture this. It's September 21st, 1327, and the cold, damp walls of Berkeley Castle in England are closing in on a man who was once a king. The air is thick with the smell of mold and despair. And in a dimly lit cell, a 43-year-old lies on a makeshift bed, his wrists and ankles raw from the chains that bind him. His graying beard frames a face etched with pain, his eyes dulled by betrayal and humiliation. This is Edward II, born to rule England, now nothing more than a forgotten prisoner in a fortress that feels more like a tomb. In the dead of night, two figures slip into his cell, their faces shadowed, carrying something straight out of a nightmare, a red-hot iron glowing with malevolent heat. What happens next is so brutal, so deliberately cruel. It's become the stuff of legend, a story that's haunted history for nearly 700 years. Welcome to WTF History, where we dive into the wild, weird, and downright disturbing corners of the past. Today, we're unraveling the mystery of Edward II's horrifying death, or at least what people say happened. Was it really as gruesome as the tales claim? Or is there a twist we've been missing all this time? Grab a seat, because this is going to be one hell of a ride. Edward II wasn't just any king. Born in 1284 in Carnarvon, Wales, he was the son of Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, a warrior king who could make entire armies tremble with a single glare. Edward I was all about conquest, crushing rebellions, and building an empire. His son? Not so much. Young Edward was more into rowing, digging ditches, and hanging out with blacksmiths than swinging his sword or plotting wars. While his dad was out smashing Scottish strongholds, Edward was probably fixing a roof or joking with peasants about their crops. It's almost charming, right? Except in medieval England, kings were supposed to be warriors, not craftsmen. Edward's hobbies didn't just raise eyebrows. They made his father furious. There's a story that Edward I once lost it so bad he tore out handfuls of his son's hair, all because Edward asked for a fancy title for his best friend, a charismatic Gascon noble named Piers Gaveston. Piers wasn't just a pal. He was Edward's ride or die, the kind of guy who could make a prince forget his crown. The two were inseparable, and their bond had the court whispering. Was it chivalric bromance, like knights swearing loyalty in some epic saga? Or was it something more? Medieval chroniclers are cagey, talking about love beyond measure and indissoluble bonds. Later, a bishop in 1334 threw around the word sodomy, a term that could mean anything from heresy to, well, what you're thinking. We'll dig into that later, but for now, know this. Edward's obsession with Piers was a political landmine. When Edward I died in 1307, 23-year-old Edward II took the throne, and his first move was to bring Piers back from exile. His dad had banished him, and shower him with titles and wealth. He made Piers Earl of Cornwall, a title usually reserved for royals, and let him carry St. Edward's crown at the coronation, a massive honor. To the nobles, this was like watching the new CEO hand the company keys to his college buddy. They were pissed. Things got worse when Edward married Isabella of France, daughter of King Philip IV, in 1308. This was supposed to be a diplomatic win, tying England and France together. But Edward barely noticed his 12-year-old bride, too busy fawning over Piers. The kicker? The jewels he gave Isabella as a wedding gift ended up with Piers. Imagine being a teenage queen in a foreign land, and your husband's handing your bling to his BFF. Isabella's humiliation was public, and her dad, one of the most powerful kings in Europe, was fuming. The nobles, led by Edward's cousin Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, demanded Piers be exiled. Edward agreed, then snuck him back. This happened a few times, like a bad rom-com where the ex keeps showing up. By 1312, the nobles were done. They hunted Piers down, stabbed him, beheaded him, and left his body by the road. Edward was heartbroken, swearing revenge. But he was stuck playing nice to keep his crown. Edward's reign wasn't just about Piers, though. He was a disaster on multiple fronts. In 1314, he led an army against the Scots at Bannockburn, hoping to match his dad's legacy. Instead, he got crushed by Robert the Bruce, losing territories and face. The treasury? Drained. His leadership? Non-existent. And just when you think he'd learned his lesson, he found a new favorite, Hugh Despenser the Younger. If Piers was a problem, Hugh was a catastrophe. He and his dad, Hugh the Elder, used Edward's trust to grab land, wealth, and power, crushing anyone who crossed them. The nobles were livid, and Isabella, now a grown woman, was pushed to the sidelines. Her role as queen reduced to a formality. The resentment was building, and it was about to explode. By 1325, Isabella had had enough. Sent to France on a diplomatic mission, she linked up with Roger Mortimer, a noble who'd escaped the Tower of London after crossing the Despensers. Mortimer was cunning, ambitious, everything Edward wasn't. Together, they hatched a plan to take him down. In 1326, they invaded England with a small army. And here's the crazy part. Almost everyone welcomed them. Nobles, commoners, even the church. They were all done with Edward. He and the Despensers fled west, but they were caught. Hugh the Younger's execution was a spectacle. Dragged, hanged, castrated, disemboweled, beheaded. His head stuck on London Bridge. Edward was forced to abdicate in January 1327, handing the crown to his 14-year-old son, Edward III. They locked him up in Berkeley Castle. And that's where the story takes a dark turn, pulling us deeper into the mystery of what really happened to this fallen king. Edward's new home in Berkeley Castle wasn't exactly a royal palace. At first, his imprisonment wasn't terrible. Decent food, a bed, maybe a sliver of hope he'd just fade into obscurity. But Isabella and Mortimer weren't taking chances. Killing a king outright was risky. Dead kings become martyrs, and they didn't want Edward supporters rallying around his memory. So they got creative. Accounts say his conditions went downhill fast. No pants to irritate his skin, filthy cells to break his body, whispered threats to crush his spirit. The goal was to make him die naturally, maybe from disease or despair, so no one could cry murder. But Edward was tougher than he looked. He didn't just roll over and die, even as the months dragged on. By September 1327, with rumors of a rescue plot swirling, Isabella and Mortimer were out of patience. This is where the infamous red-hot iron story comes in. The one where two men slip into his cell, pin him down, and slide a glowing iron through a horn tube to burn his insides without leaving a mark. It's gruesome, it's horrifying, and it's straight out of a medieval nightmare. That story, though, didn't show up until decades later, in a chronicle by Geoffrey Le Baker around 1350. It's so vivid, so perfectly awful. It feels like propaganda, maybe cooked up during Edward III's reign to make his dad's enemies look like monsters. Plus, it's got this symbolic edge, tying the murder to rumors about Edward's private life in a way that's almost too neat. Historians aren't convinced. Burning someone from the inside out is tricky and messy. Why not just smother him with a pillow? It's quick, clean, and leaves no trace. Some even wonder if Edward died at all. There's this wild letter from 1333 called the Fiesca Letter, where an Italian cleric named Manuel Fieschi claims he met Edward II years after his supposed death. According to Fieschi, Edward escaped, swapped places with a dead porter, and wandered Europe as a hermit, ending up in Italy. In 1338, a guy calling himself William the Welshman even showed up at the Holy Roman Empire's court, claiming to be Edward. Most scholars think it's a long shot, but a few say it's not impossible. After all, Edward's body was embalmed for his 1327 funeral, which would have hidden any trauma. Who's to say the body in the coffin was really him? What we do know is that Edward III, once he took full control in 1330, went after the guys who'd guarded his dad. Thomas Gurney was executed, John Maltravers exiled. Isabella and Mortimer didn't escape either. Mortimer was hanged, and Isabella was locked away in comfortable but firm house arrest. Edward III was sending a message: mess with my family, and you're done. But the fact that he went so hard suggests he believed something shady happened at Berkeley. Whether it was the iron, a pillow, or a great escape, Edward II's end was a turning point. Deposing a king wasn't just a power grab. It cracked the idea that kings ruled by divine right. If you could kick one king off the throne, what's stopping you from doing it again? That question hung over England, setting the stage for more royal dramas down the line. The shadow of Edward II's death didn't just fade away, it grew, twisting into a legend that shaped how people saw him and his reign. By 1327, Edward III is king, but he's just a kid, and Isabella and Mortimer are running the show. They're trying to stabilize a kingdom that's been through hell, but Edward II's story is already becoming a cautionary tale. The red-hot iron narrative, gruesome as it is, wasn't just a horror story, it was useful. When Edward III grew up and seized power in 1330, he needed to bury his mom's and Mortimer's legacy. Executing Mortimer and sidelining Isabella was step one. Step two? Let the chroniclers spin a tale that made them look like villains. That's where Geoffrey Luke Baker's Chronicle comes in, with its vivid description of the iron. It's not just about murder. It's about painting Edward's death as a punishment for his sins, tying it to rumors about his sexuality in a way that stuck. By the time Christopher Marlowe wrote his play Edward II in the 1590s, the iron was a fixture in the story. Marlowe doesn't spell it out, but theater productions loved adding that scene, making it a staple of the legend. It's like a medieval urban myth, too shocking to forget. Edward's deposition was a bigger deal than the gossip, though. Before him, the idea of dethroning a king was almost unthinkable. Kings were God's chosen, untouchable. But Edward's fall showed that if a king screwed up bad enough, his own people could take him down. This wasn't just a one-off, it set a precedent. Look at Richard II in 1399 or Henry VI in the 1400s. When kings failed, the nobles knew they had options. Edward II's story cracked the foundation of medieval power, making it clear that even divine right had its limits. And those rumors about his personal life? They didn't just hurt him, they shaped how history judged him. In medieval Europe, anything that didn't fit the ideal king mold was a problem. Edward's closeness to Piers Gaveston and maybe others was seen as a weakness, a flaw that explained his failure. Later, chroniclers leaned into this, suggesting his unnatural behavior led to his downfall. It became a template for slamming other rulers, like James I or Henry III of France, whose personal lives got similar shade. The message was clear: step out of line, and you're doomed. That Fiesca letter, with its wild claim that Edward survived, keeps the mystery alive. Even if it's a stretch, it's hard not to wonder. What if he did escape? What if he traded his crown for a hermit's robes and slipped away to Italy? The fact that we're still debating it shows how much this story grabs us. His tomb in Gloucester Cathedral, with its serene alabaster effigy, doesn't help. It's a king frozen in dignity, no hint of the chaos that defined his life. Visitors still come, drawn by the scandal, the tragedy, the question mark hanging over his fate. So here we are, at the end of Edward II's wild, tragic story. This isn't just about a king who maybe met a gruesome end. It's about a man caught between who he was and what his world demanded. Edward wasn't a great king. He wasn't even a good one. He picked the wrong friends, lost the wrong battles, and trusted the wrong people. But there's something human about him, something that hits you right in the gut. He loved fiercely, whether it was Piers Gaveston or just the freedom to be himself. In a world that wanted a warrior, a diplomat, a symbol of God's will, he was just Edward. And that's what broke him. His story is a reminder that history isn't just crowns and conquests. It's people, messy and flawed, trying to survive a world that doesn't always make room for them. Edward II's fall changed England, showing that even kings could be held accountable. The rumors about his life shaped how we think about power and identity, leaving a legacy that's as much about culture as it is about politics. That tomb in Gloucester? It's not just a monument. It's a puzzle, a place where history dares us to find the truth. So, what do you think? Was Edward II the victim of a brutal murder, or did he pull off the greatest escape in medieval history? Did his passions doom him, or is he just a guy in the wrong place at the wrong time? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're hooked on this medieval madness, hit that subscribe button for more WTF history. We've got plenty more stories where kings crash, queens rise, and the past gets weirder than you ever imagined. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another dive into the craziest corners of history.